In 1990, if you were 35 years old, your entire life, you only knew Disneyland existing. And if you were 45 in 1990, the perfect age of 10 years old when Disneyland would open up, meaning your entire rest of your life, you would know the influence of Disney. Disneyland would open up in 1955 and change the world of thematic entertainment, being the world's first ever theme park. And then in 1971 would open up the Magic Kingdom out in Orlando. Las Vegas definitely does predate Disneyland. However, in the 1990s, Las Vegas went through its third building boom. During this third major building construction boom of Las Vegas, 5 hotels would show up on the Las Vegas Strip, each one borrowing a bit of inspiration from the thematic designs of the Disney Corporation and what they've been doing at their theme parks and experiences. This is the advent of the Disney-inspired casinos on the Las Vegas Strip, where the facades started telling you a major narrative, a major story, before you even set foot into where you would hopefully gamble and stay. So when you think about the timeline of how old the people were when they worked on designing these hotels in the 90s, these are people that Disney was a part of their childhood. And then as a young adult or mid-age adult, they're trying to think about what's that nostalgia, what's that design technique that I can pull off that'll reinvent this thing called Las Vegas and have people of my generation feel a sort of instant nostalgia. And even though nothing here actually says Disney on it, it's that feeling of going to the Magic Kingdom or Disneyland as a kid where everything feels possible and escapism is all around you. Las Vegas is a place where people to go to escape for several different reasons. I think the thematic resorts was kind of getting into that psyche of, can we make this a true family vacation destination, and can we tell more stories here? Leaning on entertainment as part of the overall experience from the time that you first get out of the cab and go to check into your hotel room. This trend would kick off in the summer of 1990 when Excalibur would show up on the Las Vegas Strip, giving hotel guests a promise of an exceptional experience, all on the outer wrapping of a hotel, but once you go inside, it's no more a castle than it is a bass boat. But it is interesting to me that this decade of Disney-influenced hotels does start with Excalibur, a hotel themed after a castle. And clearly, the folks who were putting this together knew exactly what they were getting into. They wanted to invoke that feeling of Disney, that magic escapism of a quality vacation. However, they were smart enough to bring in trademark experts to make sure that nothing in this castle would resemble anything that folks would see at Disneyland with Sleeping Beauty Castle or out in Orlando with Cinderella Castle. So they wanted to inspire it, but they didn't want to get that cease and desist. Or actually, for a hotel, it would be a lawsuit, not a cease and desist. And with Excalibur that started this whole trend, most of the facade work is just in the center courtyard, and then the traditional standard tower style hotels have that same sort of castle work to them, but they're just your standard tower with just some fancy trimming on the exterior corners and then along the outer top edges and bottom edges, basically wrapping a regular building in a castle vibe. Just like both of the Disney castles that inspired it back in the day, it did have a water effect, kinetic energy of a moat going around it. You can even see like the little troll house on the edge of where the water used to be, but you know, water, we can't afford that. Number 2 on our list, the Luxor would open up 3 years later in 1993, giving off major Disney inspiration with its over-exaggerated facade, but as well a little shout out to Walt Disney World once you go inside of the hotel, and it invokes feelings of Walt Disney World's contemporary hotel with an atrium that messes with your mind because we're used to everything in the world stair-stepping up, and when it does it in the inverse and everybody has a front row seat to terror, it's a little bit different. But with all of its over-exaggerated facades, you definitely feel like you're walking into that level of storytelling, and it's just that, it's just facades. Once you get past the sculptures and all the Egyptian nods, it's basically just your regular run-of-the-mill casino. but it's that exterior that gets you excited. Hey, we're staying in a pyramid.
As a Disney theme park is a completely controlled environment, a hotel is a living, breathing thing where people have to come and go. So there are a couple of obstacles that pop up in the design of creating these resorts where they can keep the storytelling going, but also be able to service the guests. The Luxor has some pretty cool workarounds for allowing people to live inside of a pyramid. Some of these workarounds are pretty crazy. Let's show you the trick of the second floor.
Hands down, the absolute weirdest elevator experience of my life. It feels like you're going downstairs backwards. Not a fan whatsoever.
So a pyramid has 4 corners, right? And each one of these corners has an elevator going at 39 degrees, traveling up to the top of the pyramid. But each one of these corners services a certain block of rooms. So where this is blacked out, it's not servicing those rooms, it's servicing those up there. So I'm on the 18th floor. My elevator is in this column back here, but my room is on the farthest side of the pyramid. So every single time I have to walk 2 links of the hotel to get over to my room. So definitely getting my steps in. But the power of the second floor is that all of the infrastructure is on the first floor. Check-in, baggage claim, valet services, all of that exists down on the first floor, down there. But on that first floor, that's where the casino's at, that's where all the infrastructure's at. So the second floor that you see, that is where the entertainment is at, because the interior of this pyramid is a massive amount of unused square footage. So building a second floor where they can do an arcade, Titanic show, theater, shops, food court, that gives them the ability to basically have a double atrium for their hotel. And this is a drastic step up from what we saw at Excalibur, number 1 on our list. But we will see these interior designs get even more intense as the 90s go along. But for the second attempt, the Luxor did some creative problem solving, did some storytelling, and did a lot of Disney influence with the way that it created lots of the facades that are on the second floor, and then the main facades that you walk into the grand entryways, setting up that story that the hotel never really lives up to, but they tried. So that lowest light right there, there goes the black, there's the lowest light. That is my elevator. And I had to walk that whole length to get over to my room. And also because you're in a pyramid, this is what the windows look like. Your room has 2 crazy angled windows that give you your view out into the rest of the Vegas Strip, depending on which side of the pyramid that you're on. So definitely some very interesting problem solving when you put people inside of these thematic spaces. In the Disney theme parks, they build a facade that normally clicks around a large box. Inside that box is where the restaurant, show, or experience is. But when you have people dwelling inside of these themes, it gets a little bit more tricky. And I think the Luxor is a great example of creative problem solving, reverse engineering whatever your grand idea is for that curbside appeal. Let's move on to number 3. I think this one is the most dead on the nose Disneyland ripoff. And keep in mind, Fantasmic would show up at the Disneyland Resort in 1992. This would show up in 1993. But probably the most dead-on example is 1993's Treasure Island, where there's a full-on recreated Adventureland here, or a Pirates Land, where you can see all of the front facade out here was not only designed to invoke that Treasure Island adventure vibe, but also everything is a working stage show. Catwalks, little nooks and crannies where over 24 performers would perform a show several times a day on these 2 ships out front of Treasure Island. The Battle of Buccaneer Bay was a 15-minute show that would roughly happen like every 22 minutes or so out in the front facade of Treasure Island. 2 different ships, an entire Adventureland type vibe and aesthetic. This one, it definitely feels way more like a theme park attraction than a hotel. But unlike later on in our list where we would see the front facade pair better with the actual hotel, this 1993 example has a lot of show out front, but then a more basic hotel recess behind it. That will change later on our list, where the theming will start curbside and work its way all the way up to the towers behind that street level approach of, come on in, this is entertainment, you want to stay here. The Senior Frogs is not original. That was added in and developed later when they were trying to get away from the more kitschy Pirates theme that they had put out front. But you can see behind the Senior Frogs lots of little nooks popping out that does have sort of that Adventureland aesthetic that would match the boats out front. And once again in the rock work, you can see all the little hidden pieces of show telling where there's different little platforms where characters, actors could stand, as well as lighting hidden inside of it. And then we have the double lagoon, where as we peer through the very dirty water, it does appear that there is a track that the boat sits on, and then you can see the other boat opposite the bridge in the other lagoon. Yeah, this one's definitely a little bit more obvious than the other ones on the list. Like, almost straight up looks like they just lifted it, but they would end up regretting it and getting away from doing this show out front. Even the people that run the hotel admitted, like, yeah, maybe we went a little bit too far with our theming. But definitely a moment in time that looks so different than everything that's been built in the last 20 years. I feel like looking at this hotel is going to a whole different idea of where Las Vegas could have ended up and where it was going during this run of the 90s. And with this one falling in the dead center of our list, it kind of shows a couple of earlier attempts, somebody going all in, and then in our next two, they'll slowly step back a little bit from this idea. But these 5 hotels inside of the 90s are truly the ones to me that just feel so different than anything else on the Strip. They're not new, they're not classic, they're uniquely ugly and stuck in their own little time period. Ducks out of water, really a theme that is so successful elsewhere when the sightlines can be perfectly curated and controlled by Disney, but in the wild animal that is Las Vegas, kind of just very interesting experiments from a decade of, let's see if there's a different approach to doing this. Turns out there wasn't.
Number 4 on our list, New York, New York would show up in 1997. When you look at the exterior of New York, New York, you can definitely see what they have done with forced perspective and also the puzzle piece design that Disney is so good at. When you think about the World Showcase in Epcot, or New Orleans Square in Disneyland, or Liberty Square inside of the Magic Kingdom, this right here is that puzzle piece design where you're constantly turning the direction that you're building in, turning the consumer's eye 45 degrees, 30 degrees, 90 degrees, as many times as possible to make as much action feel like it's happening in a very small footprint. In the size of one high rise, they are making you think that you are looking at the famous New York City skyline, but on the other side of the country, in the middle of a desert. Totally normal. Adding in well-known icons like the Statue of Liberty and Grand Central Station, New York, New York gave hotel guests a different sort of vibe out on the Strip. Basically giving you entertainment before you've even spent a nickel. But the idea was, with this thematic entertaining, bring you in so you would spend way more than a nickel. And by the time New York, New York showed up, Disney had sort of perfected the idea of building these facades that would take their guests to a very specific location where there was a real world location like New York City or the countries of the world, or a fictional location like Cinderella Castle, or taking you back in time to a moment you can't go to, standing in front of Spaceship Earth at Epcot, going back to the time when we had World's Fairs. This design technique was first implemented by Walt Disney and his team that would go on to be called Walt Disney Imagineering. This team of creatives was taking everything that they had learned in the film industry on building sets for movies and then applying that into the real world. But there comes a lot of different restraints when you're doing it for the real world, where the buildings need to have a longer lifespan and also need to be able to service guests experiences in so many different ways. movie sets, most buildings you never ever go into. But when you build something in the technique of a movie set with forced perspective and trying to fit as much story into a small space, that's fine when you're just building a facade. But the advent of what Disney figured out was how to take these facades and attach them to traditional buildings. So Main Street USA, for example, at Disneyland, it looks like a turn of the century, good old America little street you're going down. However, even though visually you think that you see 24 different buildings that you can go into, there's actually only 4 buildings there. 2 buildings on the east side of the street, 2 buildings on the west side of the street. But what makes these 4 buildings so special is all the different facades that are pinned to the exterior to every 10 to 15 to 20 feet. That's exactly what we're seeing happening with New York, New York, where one building has been sculpted several different times to appear like you're looking at an entire skyline when it's just a big box with all these different facades wrapped around the outside of it. Well, it's crazy noisy just like New York City, but one of the things that they do that makes this trick pull off so well that they learned from Disney is the lower facade that's on the street level. It looks to be 3 stories tall. It's a forced perspective, so it feels bigger than what it really is. But because this is close to us and it feels somewhat like reality, and then the actual hotel is on the back side of the casino, that takes the skyscrapers and pushes them back as far as possible. So when you stand in front of a building that's in front of you and it feels real, it does try to trick your mind as much as possible that yeah, everything back there, it's real as well. This forced perspective isn't totally dialed in, but it is a fun little magic trick, and it did get people's attention when it showed up in this period in the 90s.
And this is a perfect example of that, with all of these buildings in the front giving you the idea that you're in front of something that feels somewhat real, and then there you have the Chrysler building just popping up behind you, along with some other city-style buildings. When you look up, just your basic hotel, just with a little bit of a fancier design protruding out, and then that Las Vegas storytelling vibe wrapped around its outer shell. This part of New York, New York behind me perfectly symbolizes what I was just talking about. Out here is the street level where that front facade is that feels very accurate to us. And then back here is the skyscraper portion that is wildly out of proportion. When you see the space between the two, you realize the angle that they're using to try to pull off this effect. These buildings do not look real at all from the side, the same way they do over on the major corner intersection, or as well when you're walking up the sidewalk. But we would also see the look that was created for New York, New York, get replicated as the final hotel on our list, as in 1999, this trend would go away and the hotels would start to look again more like gold office buildings. Now, before we get into our last one, the Venetian would also open up in 1999, just a few months before our final one on the list, wrapping up this wild decade of theme park, hotel, experiential design at Las Vegas, where the resorts were getting kind of wild with their themes. However, I don't put this one on the list because even though it's clearly going for that type of third boom decade of design, the design is just so spread out. Like, the Venetian never really fully captures you in its courtyard like New York, New York, or some of the others. It's a very odd shape, and it has it in bits and pieces, but not consistently enough to please me or to make it feel truly successful. And it is a really cool design. I just don't think they were given the proper footprint to execute it or to make it deliver. And I love that people always want to honk their horn when you're recording. And part of truly successful immersive design is being able to control the plot of land that you commandeer and take over. The Venetian has lots of really great parts. I just don't think they were able to fully manifest it into this bizarre plot of land. And I do believe there would have been an option to pull it off. They just didn't quite nail it. So in the small pieces, it's successful, but as an overall resort theme that feels like it really pulls you in, it falls a little bit short on my list. But it does definitely indicate, once again, this and the Stratosphere exactly where Vegas was at during the 90s, even though this and the Stratosphere aren't two of my favorite from this decade. Showing up in 1999, we see Paris. The Paris resort does try its best to emulate the magic of Paris with all of the different sculpture and facade work everywhere, like flourishes, statues, eagles. Like when you go over to Paris, there are no limitations or budget on any building, with Paris being the final building that would be built on the Vegas Strip with this sort of design motif in mind, trying to throw it all out on the table, trying to put all of those little Parisian details into every square inch of everything that you see. No easy task. And if this is the way this decade had to end, it went out on a high note, because this outer facade is uniquely Europe, doesn't look anything like Nevada, doesn't look like much of anything that you would find in America, a relatively new country in comparison to France. This one is the end of the era. Strong note to go out on. Similar to what we saw with New York, New York, Paris has a big Parisian facade out front with all of the concrete work, which is, I believe, supposed to be marble. That's how it is over in Paris, which is the most beautiful city I've ever been to. But they have that facade pushed out on the outer edge. But if you look cleverly, the right angle of the hotel tower creates a cul-de-sac or a courtyard that the Eiffel Tower is perfectly aligned with. Therefore, when you stand in this area, you can kind of get lost in a dead end that is only Paris. Not nearly as effective as some of the things that we see in the Disney parks, but for something that's just off the side of the street without the same amount of controlled sight lines that Disney has, does a pretty good job. And once again, there's that space between the back hotel structure and the front facade, trying to make this feel enormous to you, pushing that back further to make it feel even larger. Not quite the same vibe as New York, New York, but the same overall principle. Now, by placing their Eiffel Tower up on the back of the facade, it does push it back a little bit more, adding a little bit of height, but it's nothing like standing next to the real thing or the other imitation out at Kings Island outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, my home park growing up as a kid. What I feel makes Paris truly unique is how much of the Disney design techniques that you find when you go in the interior, basically wrapping the entire outline of the casino in a lot of the storytelling facades that we see in nearly all of the Disney theme parks, creating that community, creating that vibe, taking the guests somewhere very far away from where they're actually standing. When we walk around the interior of Paris, you see that facade work in every direction. Each little bit of the external wall of the casino has a little different bit of storytelling, whether it feels residential, shopping, or a little quiet plaza, transportation. All of the different elements are represented as you walk around, giving you the feeling of not just walking on a gaming floor in Nevada, but walking through a Parisian neighborhood and a courtyard of storytelling, where it's as much or as little as you want to give it your attention and what you want to make out of it. But if you give me this versus just plain walls, I'm going to take this every single time. And this is one of the things that the Disney Parks does to separate its different lands, to create barriers so you can't see other parts of the theme park, fully placing the guests inside of an environment of storytelling, controlling the perspective and the narrative of what they see. This works well in the interior because here, Paris's architects and designers have the ability to create perfect sight lines. But the trick of Las Vegas is creating those perfect sight lines on one of the busiest streets in all of America, where chaos is everything that you're working against. So trying to create balance inside of design, not always the easiest thing, but it has been done once or twice. And then one of the greatest storytelling devices, creating the corridor. You make the world big and then you make it small again, wrapping your guests around all kinds of immersion and storytelling. This is one of the greatest Disney design tricks, and seeing this corridor inside of Paris is absolutely perfect. When you start walking down this road, you feel like you don't know where you're going, but there's some sort of story that's leading you in. And I love that about this style of architecture and design. But I would have to imagine that there had to be an exploratory trip out to Epcot to look at the World Showcase and kind of see how somebody else tried to bring other cultures into a smaller footprint and do architectural storytelling, creating an environment that will make the guests feel like we have placed them someplace exotic. And when you go on vacation, isn't that what you're looking for? To go someplace exotic. Las Vegas already offers that. Then when they can Russian doll that and nest that experience deeper and deeper and deeper to where the hotel, the show, the overall vibe of Vegas, the hotel room, the game that you play, just trying to bring in that energy time and time again. The 90s in Las Vegas brought 5 unique resorts, each one of them looking a little gaudy and a little outdated right now, but I'll always have a soft spot in my heart because you can see the Disney inspiration and you can see that there was a decade of really trying to push Las Vegas into family entertainment, thematic entertainment, some sort of different vibe than where it started out and to where it's currently at today. Friends, Brickey here. I hope you enjoyed going on this bizarre architectural look at Disney's influence on Las Vegas. If you enjoyed this video, watch this video right here. I'm so happy that you showed up. I appreciate you.